My father kicked me out of the house, calling me a burden. When I moved out, I stopped paying the bills. Hello, Reddit. Before I get into this, I just want to ask you guys to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on notifications. It really helps more than you know. These stories barely get seen, and most people don't even stick around to the end. If you're still here by the time I finish, you're a real one. Now let me tell you about the Christmas Eve that ruined everything for me. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. I'd made peace with the fact that I was still living at home at 24. I had a decent job working nights at a warehouse in town, and I helped out around the house as much as I could. Paid for my own car, handled my phone bill, even chipped in for groceries when I had a little extra. I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I wasn't just sitting around either. That night, we were having our traditional Christmas Eve dinner, just the four of us. My mom, Claire, had gone all out like she always did. There were candles. The table was set with those fake gold-rimmed plates she only pulled out twice a year, and she'd made her usual honey-glazed carrots that no one really liked, but we all pretended to enjoy for her sake. My dad, Ron, had carved the turkey while sipping his one beer he always allowed himself on holidays, and my little sister Megan was busy playing with the filters on her phone. I remember the moment too clearly. I had just finished off the last piece of turkey, sitting there with that warm, tired feeling you get after a big meal, when my dad set his fork down. It didn't clink or clatter. He did it slowly, deliberately. He looked straight at me, not at the food, not at the TV playing some Hallmark movie in the background. At me. You're a burden, he said. Just like that. We can no longer afford to keep you at home. I thought maybe it was a joke. A bad one. My mom kind of laughed nervously, gave this half smile like maybe he was kidding. But he didn't break eye contact. Didn't even blink. He was dead serious. Megan froze, fork halfway to her mouth, like she'd just watched someone slap me across the face. I didn't say anything at first. I looked at my mom. Her smile faded, but she didn't say a word. Just looked down at her plate. Megan set her fork down slowly and stared at me, like waiting for me to explode. I didn't. I couldn't. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I asked him what he meant, trying to keep my voice calm. He just shrugged and said that at my age, I should already be on my own, that they had done their part, and now it was time for me to man up and figure out life without leaning on them. Like I was some teenager living off their dime, not a grown man working 12-hour shifts and doing his best to stay afloat. Mom tried to soften the blow, saying something like, "We just think it's time for you to find your own path, sweetie." But she didn't really mean it. She wasn't trying to comfort me, just trying to make herself feel better for sitting there and letting it happen. I asked if there was something I'd done, something that pushed them to this. Dad said no, that it was just time, that they needed the space, that having a grown man in the house was not sustainable anymore. I asked about Megan, if she was getting kicked out at 24 too. He didn't even look at her. It's different, was all he said. I got up from the table and walked outside. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there on the front lawn in the freezing cold while the steam from my breath hung in the air and the lights on the front porch blinked like nothing had changed. I could hear the sound of forks clinking inside again. They just went back to dinner like it was nothing. I ended up spending the night in my car. I parked in a Walmart lot a couple towns over, wrapped myself in a hoodie, and just sat there, trying to process what had happened. I had a duffel bag with a few clothes in the back, because I'd planned to hit the gym on Christmas morning. I guess in a weird way, that worked out. At least I had a toothbrush. The next few days were a blur. I didn't talk to them. They didn't reach out. Not even Megan. It was like I'd never been part of that house to begin with. Like all those years, all those nights I stayed up late helping Megan study for her finals, all the groceries I bought when Mom didn't have the energy to cook, all the times I drove Dad home after his work drinks, none of it mattered. I finally scraped together enough to rent a tiny room over a garage in a sketchy part of town. The guy didn't ask for a credit check, just first month's rent in cash. It was barely insulated, and the toilet made this awful gurgling sound every time I flushed, but it was mine. And no one there told me I was a burden. That was the Christmas that ruined everything. I haven't been home since. Haven't spoken to my dad. Mom sent me a Christmas card the next year with a $20 Starbucks gift card taped inside. Like that somehow made it all okay. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there, feeling this weird pressure in my chest like my lungs had shrunk and I couldn't breathe properly. My fork was still in my hand, frozen halfway to my plate, and I remember watching the gravy slowly drip off the end and land in a little puddle on the white tablecloth. It felt like I was watching someone else's life, like I'd somehow floated up out of my body and was hovering over the table looking down on all of us. I looked at my dad, at Ron, and tried to understand what I'd just heard. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He sat there with his back straight like he was delivering some final verdict. And then I looked at my mom. Claire gave me this apologetic smile like I was overreacting, Like this wasn't the moment everything in my world had just cracked. Megan was dead quiet, still frozen in place, eyes wide and scared. Like maybe she thought if she didn't move, this would all just go away. The word kept bouncing around my skull. Burden. A burden. How the hell could I be a burden? I paid the electricity bill every single month. I paid for the internet, the water, and groceries almost every week. The car in the driveway? I paid to have it repaired after Ron stripped the brake pads down to metal because he didn't hear anything unusual. The only reason we had a working washer and dryer was because I bought them, used, off Facebook Marketplace, and spent 2 days in the freezing garage getting them hooked up. When the roof leaked last spring, I climbed up there myself, patched it with sealant and tar from Home Depot, and didn't even ask them to pay me back. And now I was being told I was the one dragging them down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and throw the turkey across the room. But all I did was stare at my plate while my mind spun. Ron hadn't worked in over 5 years. Not since he got laid off and decided he was done with the corporate world. Claire worked 20 hours a week at the local library and spent the rest of her time reading mystery novels on the back porch or scrolling through Pinterest. And I wasn't judging that, until now. Until the moment they decided to pretend like I hadn't been the one keeping this house from collapsing under its own weight. I pushed my chair back slowly, trying not to make a scene. The wood legs scraped against the floor anyway, and everyone flinched. I stood up and walked to the sink with my plate. I remember rinsing it off and setting it gently in the dishwasher like it mattered. Like that small action might prove something. Then I turned around and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, heart pounding. You really think I'm a burden? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Ron didn't answer right away. He picked up his beer, took a sip, then set it down with this casual little nod like we were talking about the weather. It's not personal, he said. It's just not working anymore. You've been here too long. Too long. That stung worse than anything. Like I had an expiration date I hadn't noticed. I looked back at Megan. Her fork was still on her plate. She looked like she was about to cry, but didn't want to be the first one to break. I didn't blame her. She was 16. She still had time to pretend our family wasn't rotting from the inside out. Claire finally spoke again, but it was this soft, useless thing. We're just saying maybe it's time to think about next steps, Ethan. You're a grown man. I'm a grown man who pays half your damn bills, I said, my voice finally rising. Who keeps this house running while your husband watches reruns of Pawn Stars all day and complains about back pain every time someone mentions work? That landed. Ron's face darkened, and he opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. No, you don't get to say anything right now. Not after that. Nobody moved. Nobody told me I was wrong. Nobody said thank you either. I left my plate in the dishwasher, walked upstairs, and closed my bedroom door. Not slammed, just closed. But it felt final. Like something had snapped and wouldn't go back. I sat on my bed, still in my good jeans and Christmas sweater, and just stared at the wall for what felt like hours. The smell of turkey still clung to my sleeves, and the laughter from the living room, muted, awkward, like they were trying too hard, faded into silence. And in that silence, the one question kept circling. Am I a burden? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even slam the door like some teenager storming off after an argument. I just got up from the table, slowly and quietly, and started clearing my plate. The knife and fork made a dull clink as I set them in the sink. I rinsed everything off like it was any normal night, wiped down the bit of gravy I'd spilled earlier, and took a last glance at the dining room. Megan met my eyes. She hadn't touched her food since the moment Ron said those words. Her eyes were still wide, but now there was something else behind them. Guilt maybe. Or sadness. I gave her a small nod. That was it. I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I knew whatever came out wouldn't be calm. I went upstairs, took off the Christmas sweater that now felt like some kind of cruel joke, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. My room wasn't much, bare walls, a desk, an old dresser with one drawer that always stuck, but it was the only space in that house that felt like mine. And even that had been hanging by a thread, apparently. When the sun went down, I plugged in my phone, set it on silent, and started packing. No drama, just quiet, methodical movements. I folded my clothes neatly, stacked them in my old duffel bag. I wrapped my camera in a towel and zipped it into its case. My laptop, charger, hard drives. All the gear I used for freelance work went into the backpack I kept for gigs. I didn't have much else. A few books, some notebooks, my toothbrush. It all fit into 2 bags and a backpack. That was the sum of my life after 24 years. Downstairs, I could hear them. The voices weren't loud, but the house was old and carried sound through the vents. Ron's voice was low, gruff, like he was trying to justify something he already knew didn't sit right. He's an adult now, he said. It'll be easier for us without him. Claire's voice came next, quiet. almost too soft to hear. But he pays all the bills. That one stung. Not just because it was true, but because it meant she knew. She knew how much I did, how much I covered, and still sat there earlier like none of it mattered. Like the label of burden was somehow still justified. I sat there listening, hearing the silence stretch longer between their sentences, and then the TV came back on. Some sitcom laugh track started up like nothing had just been decided upstairs. When I zipped the last bag, I took a minute to look around the room. I didn't feel sad, not exactly. Just hollow. Like something had finally caved in after holding too much weight for too long. I didn't tell them I was leaving. Not yet. I didn't feel like I owed them that much. But I wrote a note. Nothing dramatic. Just a couple of sentences on the back of a grocery receipt I found in my backpack. I left it on the kitchen counter next to the empty pie dish Megan and I had baked in the night before. Then I went back upstairs, sat on the bed, and waited for the quiet. I don't even know what I was waiting for. Maybe I wanted to give them a chance to come up and say something. But no one did. So I just sat there, in the room I used to call mine, listening to the muffled sound of the television and the distant hum of their lives moving on without me. It was almost midnight when the door creaked open. I didn't look up right away. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, shoes on, bags packed, just waiting for the silence to settle in my bones. Megan stepped inside and closed the door behind her without saying a word at first. When she did speak, her voice cracked like she'd been holding it in for hours. What the hell was that? I looked up. Her eyes were red and puffy. She'd been crying, clearly, probably alone in her room, while our parents sat downstairs pretending like they hadn't just detonated what was left of our family. I didn't know what to say to her at first. I was too tired, too numb. But the way she stood there, arms crossed tight across her chest like she was holding herself together with pure willpower, made something in me hurt. They wanted me out, I said finally, keeping my voice low. So I'm leaving. She walked over to the bed and sat down beside me. Not close enough to touch, but just enough to feel like she was there, like someone still gave a damn. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, just looked at the bags on the floor, then back at me. You're the only reason this house still works, she said. Without you, it's going to fall apart. I let out a breath and rubbed the back of my neck. I didn't have a response for that, because I knew she was right. And yet here I was, zipped up duffel at my feet, jacket on the chair, ready to go. I hated that I had to leave her behind. That was the part eating at me. She was 16, still under their roof, still stuck in a system I couldn't break for her. I can't stay, I told her. You know that. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wiped her face with her sleeve and looked away. I could tell she was trying to be strong, not for herself, but for me. Like somehow if she held it together, it would make this easier. I'll do what I have to do, I said. They wanted me to leave. Now let them pay for it. Megan turned back to me, eyes wide, shining in the dim light from the hallway bleeding through the cracked door. She didn't argue. She didn't try to change my mind. She just nodded like she understood more than she should have to at her age. I don't want to be like them, she said. I reached over and squeezed her hand. That was all I could offer. You're not, I said. And you won't be. Not if you keep that fire in you. She stayed there with me a little while longer, both of us quiet, sitting in a room that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by things that no longer felt like home. Then she stood up, gave me one last look, and walked back to her room. I heard her door close gently behind her. And then the silence returned, heavier than before. The sky was just starting to shift from black to gray when I opened the front door. It was cold, not quite freezing, but that sharp kind of morning chill that hits a little harder when you haven't slept. I moved slowly, careful not to let the screen door slam, even though deep down I kind of wanted it to. My bags were already packed, sitting by the door like they'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I grabbed the duffel first, then the backpack, then the smaller suitcase with my gear. 3 trips. Quiet. Deliberate. The street was still asleep. No cars, no lights, no sound but the rustle of bare trees in the wind. I loaded everything into the back seat and trunk of my car, then stood there for a second with my hand on the roof. The house was behind me, but I hadn't looked yet. I didn't want to, but I forced myself to turn around. There it was. The same worn siding, the same chipped paint on the window trim. That front step I'd patched with concrete last spring after Ron tripped on it and blamed the city. The porch light was still on, casting that pale yellow glow over the door like nothing had changed. But everything had, and I didn't feel regret. Not anger either, not anymore. Just this strange sense of quiet finality. I looked at the living room window and wondered if Megan was awake. Maybe she'd heard the car. Maybe not. Either way, I hoped she knew I hadn't just vanished without a word. She was the only reason this didn't feel completely empty. I got in, closed the door gently, and started the engine. It rumbled to life, louder than I would have liked, but no one came to the window. No lights flicked on. No goodbyes. I didn't wait. I turned onto the main road, and once I was a few blocks away, I pulled over in front of a shuttered gas station. The engine idled while I took out my phone, opened my banking app, and started working through the list. Electricity, internet, water, all tied to my account, set to auto-pay from my card. I canceled each one, line by line. They'd probably notice in a couple of weeks. The next month, everything would start to shut off. The house would go quiet, literally and figuratively. Even Netflix, gone. Let them try watching reruns on that dusty cable box Ron never figured out how to cancel. As I removed the last account, I sat back in the seat and watched my breath fog up the windshield. It felt like cutting a cord, clean and final. Everything they took for granted, everything they leaned on me for, it was over. And I drove. No destination, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, the road ahead felt like mine. Jake lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a vape shop that always smelled like burnt cotton candy. The place was cluttered, loud, and half the light switches didn't work unless you jiggled them just right. But when he offered me the couch, I didn't hesitate. I showed up that morning with my bags and a half-spilled travel mug of gas station coffee, and he opened the door in a wrinkled hoodie and boxers, still brushing his teeth. He didn't ask questions, just pointed at the couch and said, "It folds out, kind of." It didn't. Not really. The springs were long dead, and the cushions sank in the middle like a hammock that had been through a war, but I dropped my bag next to it and sat down anyway. It was the most peace I'd felt in weeks. There were 3 of us in that apartment. Jake, his other roommate Brandon, and now me. Brandon was something. Loud at all the wrong times, always shirtless, and weirdly proud of his protein shake collection that took up half the fridge. He treated the living room like his personal gym, blasting music during home workouts and flexing at the reflection in the TV screen like it owed him money. He also had a dog, some mutt with too much energy and not enough social skills, who would sit across the room and just stare at me. Every night. Not barking, not moving. Just drilling into my soul like it knew I didn't belong there. But still, it was freedom. I didn't have to fix leaky faucets anymore. I didn't have to worry about whether someone else's food was in the fridge or if I was using too much hot water. I didn't have to pay half a dozen bills to keep a place running for people who looked right through me at the dinner table. Here, I paid Jake $200 a month, kept my shoes out of the way, and did the dishes when it wasn't my turn. That was it. I kept my bags tucked into the corner between the couch and the wall. My laptop lived on the coffee table. My clean clothes stayed in the suitcase unless I needed something specific, and I made a habit of folding up my blanket every morning even though no one asked me to. I didn't want to feel like a guest, even if I was one. Some nights, when Brandon was out or actually wearing headphones, it was almost quiet. Jake and I would watch old action movies or play a couple rounds of something on the Xbox. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes not. I never told him everything about what happened at home, but I think he got the gist. He didn't push, and I appreciated that more than I could explain. That couch hurt my back like hell. My feet hung off the end, and I woke up every morning feeling like I'd been body slammed by a toddler with rage issues. But I was breathing easier. No footsteps over my head. No passive-aggressive comments from the kitchen. No silent glances across the table that made my stomach turn. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't permanent. But it was mine. In the way that mattered. It started on the 3rd morning. I was lying on the couch, blanket half off, the dog still staring at me from across the room like I'd stolen its favorite chew toy, when my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, thinking it was probably one of those scam texts or maybe Jake asking if I drank the last of the milk. But then it buzzed again. And again. I picked it up, still groggy, and saw the name I hadn't expected to see so soon. Claire. I didn't answer. Just stared at it until it stopped. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Voicemail. I didn't bother listening. 2 minutes passed. Then another call, this time from Ron. That one actually made me sit up. The man hadn't called me in. I honestly couldn't remember. Not for a birthday, not even during holidays. But there he was, name lit up on my screen like some ghost trying to claw its way out of the past. I let that one ring out too. Then the message came in from Megan. Everything is falling apart. The lights are out. I stared at the text and felt this slow, creeping grin spread across my face. I didn't even try to hide it. Brandon was in the kitchen blending some foul-smelling shake, and Jake was still asleep, so I just sat there in the early light of morning, smiling like I'd just won something. Another message came in, seconds later. Dad is yelling that you've ruined everything. I exhaled through my nose, still grinning. Congratulations, I thought. They had always treated me like a backup generator. Like I was supposed to keep everything running in the background, unnoticed, until something broke, and then it was my fault. Now the power was out. The bills were unpaid. The world they'd built on top of my quiet, invisible work was starting to crack. They were finally noticing the weight I used to carry, and they were feeling it fall. I locked my phone, dropped it on the coffee table, and leaned back into the couch. It groaned under my weight, one spring popping loud enough to echo in the room. The dog blinked at me like it knew something had shifted. Maybe it had. Whatever chaos was brewing back at that house, it wasn't my problem anymore. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces, like a slow-motion car crash where everyone inside still thinks they might walk away. First, it was the internet. That one hit hard, apparently. Megan told me through short, frustrated texts. Nothing worked. No streaming, no Wi-Fi. Even Claire's tablet went dead. Ron lost his mind because he couldn't watch his morning news or whatever low-budget conspiracy channel he'd recently become obsessed with. Then came the water. I knew exactly when the payment was due because I used to set the reminders myself. I watched the date pass like it meant nothing. 4 days later, Megan messaged me again. No water, no showers, nothing to cook with. I didn't respond. I read it, locked my phone, and got back to work. I kept my head down during those 2 weeks. Worked longer hours at the warehouse. Picked up an extra shift unloading freight at night. I barely saw Jake or Brandon. Most days, I came home just long enough to shower, crash on the couch, and wake up before the dog had even moved. Every spare second I had, I was scrolling rental listings, calling property managers, running budget numbers in my head like some half-obsessed accountant. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found it. A tiny one-bedroom unit on the east side of town, tucked behind a nail salon and a laundromat. Fully furnished, clean enough, and cheap by some miracle. The landlord was an older guy who didn't ask too many questions. I handed him the deposit in cash, signed the lease with hands that still smelled like cardboard and dust from the warehouse, and got the keys right then and there. I stood in the middle of that little apartment for a long time after the landlord left. The place had a weird layout. Kitchen crammed into the corner, windows that faced a brick wall, and a couch that looked like it had survived a college party or 3, but it was mine. There was a bed, a working bathroom, a table I could sit at without hearing someone complain from the next room. Back at the house, I imagined Claire still pacing in panic, trying to figure out how to pay overdue bills with a part-time paycheck. Ron, red-faced and seething, probably breaking another remote or throwing a cushion across the room because the world no longer bent to his routine. And the lights, well, those were next. I knew the timing. It was only a matter of days. But I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't even acknowledge it. I just sat down on the worn couch in my new place, opened my laptop, and finally exhaled. It was just after 9 when the message came in. I'd just finished eating something close to dinner, a microwave burrito and half a banana, and was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. The apartment was quiet. No yelling. No TV blasting. Just the soft hum of the old fridge and the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. Then my phone buzzed. Megan, they're selling the house. And your stuff too. The computer, the TV, even the bed. I stared at the screen for a full minute, like maybe I'd read it wrong. I asked her to repeat it. She sent a picture. There, laid out like a garage sale ad, was my television, my 42-inch I bought with 2 months of overtime. My gaming chair. My damn mattress. The one I hauled up 2 flights of stairs by myself when no one offered to help. All of it, tagged and priced. The computer was the worst. That wasn't just some toy. It was my workstation. My files, my projects, my freelance portfolio, all stored on that machine. I kept it in my old room, boxed up neatly, because I hadn't had space in the apartment to bring everything yet. I thought it would be safe. I thought even they wouldn't stoop that low. But I was wrong. I don't know how I got the buyer's address. Megan, probably, though she never said directly. All I know is that 20 minutes later, I was in my car, soaked from the rain, fists clenched around the steering wheel, so hard my knuckles hurt. When I pulled up to the new place, the one-story house with a big open garage and folding tables covered in stuff that used to be mine, I didn't knock. I didn't pause. I walked straight across the driveway and found Ron by the garage, talking to a guy in a camo jacket and holding a wad of cash. Are you crazy? I said, loud enough to stop the conversation cold. You have no right to sell my stuff. He looked at me, dead in the face, no surprise, no guilt. Just that flat, dismissive look he always gave me when he thought I was overreacting. You left, he said. So they're not yours anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice shot out of me before I even knew what I was saying. I paid for everything. He shrugged, completely unfazed. If you want them, he said slowly, like he was doing me a favor, buy them. I stared at him, blinking water from my eyes, trying to wrap my head around the fact that the man who used to call himself my father was now trying to sell me back my own life. My own belongings. My work, my comfort, the things I built and earned. That was the moment I realized just how far gone he was. There was nothing left in him to argue with. No part of him that understood what he was doing was wrong. It wasn't about stuff anymore. It was about power. About control. about punishing me for walking away. And I knew. Coming here had been a mistake. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I just turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away while the rain blurred everything behind me. By the time I got home, my clothes were soaked through and my teeth were clenched so tight my jaw hurt, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. This wasn't going to be about screaming matches or broken furniture. This was going to be clean, quiet, and precise, right down to the decimal. I started with the utilities. I still had all the account numbers saved in my notes, because for the last 2 years I was the one dealing with the bills while they pretended those things paid themselves. I made a few calls: gas, electric, water, internet. I explained the situation and mentioned, very clearly, that the house was now listed for sale. That caught their attention. I asked what was owed. Between unpaid fees, late charges, and deposits that were never refunded, the total wasn't small. But here's the catch. Before a property can be sold, those debts had to be cleared. No title transfer, no closing. Just a big, blinking stop sign until someone settled the accounts. Then I made one more call. The one that mattered. Claire picked up on the third ring, her voice tight and suspicious. "Ethan, he's selling the house," I said, "without your signature." She didn't say anything at first. Just this long silence where I could almost hear her blink. Then, slowly, like she wasn't sure she heard me right, she asked, "What do you mean?" "I mean your name is on the deed, and he's trying to sell it without your consent. That's illegal." Another pause. Then I heard it, her breath hitching, the small intake of air that comes when reality starts clicking into place. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I hung up before she could ask more questions. By the end of that same day, Megan sent me another message. This time it wasn't desperation or frustration. It was short. Just 2 words. "He's out." Ron had tried to go through with the sale, ignoring the paperwork, the unpaid bills, the missing signature. Claire found out. And for the first time, she didn't let it slide. She kicked him out. No more pretending. No more excuses. She threw him out of the house he hadn't paid a dime to maintain in 5 years. Homeless. Broke. And now, without a wife. I sat back on my couch, phone in hand, and didn't smile. Not this time. There was nothing sweet about it. Just a quiet, sharp sense of balance restored. Not revenge with fire. Just numbers. Just math. In the end, I didn't go back for the stuff. The computer, the bed, the TV, none of it mattered anymore. Let them sell it. Let them sleep in the ruins. I had something better now. Something they never gave me and never could. I had peace. The apartment wasn't much. It was small, the furniture didn't match, and the walls were too thin. I could hear my upstairs neighbor coughing through the vents, but it was mine. I didn't walk on eggshells. I didn't dread walking through the door. I could leave a mug in the sink overnight without someone making it a personal attack. There was no tension humming through the walls, no silent glares across a dinner table. Just quiet. I kept working. I got a better shift, started saving. I added a little rug to the living room, hung up some prints I found at a thrift store. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. The nights didn't feel so heavy anymore. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came, except one. Megan. She never stopped texting. She was the only one who didn't go silent or turn on me. She sent little updates, sometimes just a line or two. How school was going, what she cooked for dinner, some ridiculous thing Ron had done before Claire kicked him out. We didn't talk about the past much. She didn't need to explain. I already knew. And that was enough. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about the way Ron said it. "You're a burden." Like that word meant something. Like it carried weight. And yet now, with me gone, the entire house crumbled in under a month. Bills unpaid. Utilities shut off. Furniture sold. Marriage shattered. The truth was simple. The one they saw as a problem had been the one keeping everything standing. Quietly. Constantly. Without thanks. I was never the burden. I was the backbone. And now I was free. 1 month later, Ron was exactly where he belonged. Drifting from couch to couch. Living off whatever scraps of sympathy he could squeeze out of old drinking buddies and former coworkers who hadn't figured him out yet. Nobody wanted to keep him around for long. Turns out, when you strip away the ego and the grumbling and the empty opinions, there's not much left of a man who spent 5 years refusing to lift a finger. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't misunderstood. He was just lazy. And now, nobody wanted to take responsibility for a grown man with no future, no job, and no drive. Claire tried calling. More than once. Her name would pop up on my phone every few days, and I'd just watch it buzz on the nightstand until it went silent. She tried messaging Megan too, asking her to talk some sense into your brother. But it was too late. That door had closed and locked behind me. I had moved on. I invested in myself. Took some online certifications, upgraded my resume, networked where it mattered. Within a few weeks, I landed a promotion at work, a better title, better pay, actual benefits. The kind of job people stop calling just a warehouse gig and start calling a real position. I bought a used but clean Toyota Camry in cash. Nothing flashy, just something that started every morning and didn't leak power steering fluid when I turned left. And I started traveling. Nothing dramatic. Weekend trips, cheap flights, just getting out of the city and seeing something new for the first time in years. It felt good to go somewhere without anyone asking for money or a ride or a favor. Every time I crossed a state line, I felt a little lighter. I still talked to Megan. She stayed the only connection I kept from that chapter of my life. We texted almost daily now. I helped her with a college application essay, sent her a birthday gift card, nothing huge, just enough to let her know I was still here. Still me, but everyone else, gone. And I made a promise to myself, never again. Just when I thought the story had reached its end, when I was finally getting used to the quiet hum of a life without chaos, it showed up. A thick white envelope, crisp and official looking, sitting in my mailbox like a bad joke. At first I thought maybe it was another credit card offer or something from the DMV, but then I saw the sender. County Court. I opened it standing right there in the hallway, jacket still on, keys in my hand. Inside was a summons to appear in court. Plaintiff, Ronald and Claire Marshall. Defendants, me. I read it 3 times before I could fully register what it was saying. My own parents, or what was left of them as far as I was concerned, were suing me. The accusations? Unlawfully interfering with the family's financial activities. Obstructing the sale of property. Ron had apparently filed for damages, claiming that my actions, my calls to the utility companies, the warning to Claire, and all the so-called deliberate sabotage had disrupted the pending sale of the house and caused them financial loss. He attached some inflated estimate of what the house could have sold for and framed me like some rogue hacker who'd launched a one-man attack on the Marshall estate. Legally, it was total nonsense. The kind of thing a halfway decent lawyer could rip to shreds in 10 minutes. But technically, I had made the calls. I had flagged the unpaid bills. I had told the truth. And that was all Ron needed to spin a narrative. It didn't matter that the house had never been fully his to sell. It didn't matter that I was the one who had been paying to keep it standing. None of that made it into the complaint. I sat down on my couch and held the letter in my lap for a while, just staring at it. Not angry, not scared, just tired, bone-deep tired. After everything, after the insults, the betrayal, the stolen property, the silence, this was the final act. A last-ditch tantrum disguised as legal action. One more way to pretend they were the victims. They kicked me out. They sold my stuff. They destroyed whatever thin thread of family still existed. And now they wanted to drag me into court for not letting them cash in on the house I helped keep alive for years. All because I stopped paying for their life and started living mine. There's no dramatic ending to this one, at least not yet. Just paperwork and court dates and the quiet, simmering disbelief that this is who they turned out to be. So tell me, what would you do if the people who threw you out tried to sue you for not letting them profit off your back? Would you fight it, or let them crash and burn on their own? I really want to hear your thoughts. I wasn't afraid. Not this time. As soon as I got that summons, I called a lawyer. Not just some budget office in a strip mall, but a real one. A guy recommended by one of my co-workers who'd gone through a messy custody case and said he was a bulldog in court. We met the next morning. I laid everything out for him. Every detail. I brought folders filled with payment records, old bank statements, check stubs, emails confirming utility accounts in my name. I had screenshots from years of online bill pay, copies of the receipts from when I bought the appliances, the food, even the replacement furnace part I'd picked up out of pocket the winter Ron refused to call a technician. For years of paper. For years of proof. The court date came quicker than I expected. I wore the only decent button-down I owned and sat at that table with my attorney, calm, quiet, and ready. Claire and Ron were there too, across the room. She looked tired. He looked smug, like he still thought he had the upper hand. The hearing was supposed to be short, just a basic preliminary to see if the complaint had any merit. But when my lawyer started speaking, laying out each detail, each payment, each line item I had covered, the room changed. It went from routine to something else, something heavier. At one point, Ron's lawyer stood up and asked me a question I could tell he thought would trip me up. His tone was clipped, confident, rehearsed. Mr. Marshall, if you were under no legal obligation to pay for these utilities or household expenses, why did you do it? I looked him dead in the eye and said, loud and clear, because I believe that the family should stay together. And then they threw me out at Christmas. The room went silent. Not tense, not dramatic, just still. Even the judge leaned forward, just slightly, like he hadn't expected that answer. Then came the part that sealed it. Megan had sent me an audio file a few nights before. I didn't want to use it. I didn't ask her to record it, but she did it on her own. It was from the night I left, recorded from her room through the vent in the floor. It wasn't long, maybe 20 seconds. But Ron's voice was crystal clear. Let him go. We can handle it. My lawyer played it once. Just once. We watched as the judge scribbled something down, slowly, deliberately. Claire dropped her eyes to the floor. Ron didn't even blink. He just shifted in his seat like the chair had gotten uncomfortable. The evidence was more than enough. We didn't even have to finish the hearing. The judge dismissed the case right there and then, told Ron and Claire that pursuing it further could put them at risk for court costs and counterclaims. Their lawyer didn't argue. We walked out of that courtroom, and I didn't look back. Not once. But I could feel it. That for the first time, the truth wasn't buried under guilt or silence. It had been spoken out loud, in front of witnesses, under oath. And it wasn't mine to carry anymore. The judge's words were clean, direct, and final. This lawsuit is groundless. All claims are dismissed. And then came the part one wasn't expecting, but deeply appreciated. Ron and Claire were ordered to pay my legal fees in full. I didn't react in the moment. Just sat there with my hands folded, breathing steady, while Ron's jaw tensed and Claire lowered her eyes to the table. The gavel came down like a nail in the coffin of everything they tried to build on top of me. That was it. No more pretending. No more twisted version of events. The court had spoken, and the truth had been written into the record. When we stepped out into the hallway, the buzz of voices from other hearings faded behind me. I was halfway to the exit when I heard her voice. Ethan, wait. I turned. Claire stood there by the door, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. She looked tired, older than I remembered. Maybe guilt does that to people. We made a mistake, she said. Her voice was quiet, not trembling exactly, just small. But we're your family. I looked at her for a moment, just long enough to make sure I wouldn't forget that moment. Not out of spite, not to hurt her, just to remember how it felt to finally stop needing the apology. No, I said. You weren't my family. You were my project. But that's over. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I'd already turned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look back. I walked out of that building and into the afternoon air like I was finally breathing for the first time in years. I left more than a courthouse that day. I left behind the people who had forfeited the right to call themselves my family the moment they chose convenience over love. I walked away from their expectations, their silence, their entitlement. And I didn't take a single piece of it with me. So that's where it ends. What about you? What would you have said in that hallway? Would you have forgiven them, or walked away like I did? Do you think there's ever a point where people like that deserve another chance? I'm curious. Tell me what you'd do.